Hi, folks. I'm Brother Dave Cruz from Desert Gateway Baptist Church, and I'd like to give another little video presentation and a very practical lesson. It's not so much Bible this time, it's going to be pretty practical stuff, maybe some common sense stuff. We're going to talk about how to make a hospital call. And with this video, I'll also attach the paperwork for this that you can download. Either you can print it or just follow along online if you want on your screen. But we'd like to start off by reading Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 to 15. And the Bible there says, "And when Jesus was come unto Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and ministered unto them." And then also in Matthew 25, verses 34 to 36 says this, "Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me no meat, or gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me." Excuse me. Now, from these two passages, first of all, in Matthew 8, we read about Jesus coming to Peter's mother-in-law's house, and he ended up healing her. But he's making a call. He's making a visit on someone who's sick. And then again in Matthew 25, in verse 36, talks about, "I was sick, and ye visited me." And I think every one of us, if not all of us, most of us, have made a hospital call, have visited someone in the hospital, whether it be a relative or a good friend, or maybe just for the sake of the church, you visited somebody, and that's really good. I mean, we should be doing those things, but sometimes we don't use common sense when we go into a room, and I'd like to offer you some pointers. And if you have that sheet before you, or you want to look at it on screen, it's kind of a lengthy thing, so I'm just going to go through and highlight some things and maybe make a point about each individual point, I guess, and make some kind of comment about it. And it's important for us to keep in mind the following principles when we're making a hospital call. Again, this is common sense things, so some of you probably already abide by these things, but nevertheless, it might be good for us to go through them and review them anyhow, okay? The first thing, number one, is call first. That's if you can, okay? Sometimes people can't be reached, but if you can call ahead of time and ask if it would be convenient to stop by, that's always a good policy, to call first. Sometimes you need to call a family member or whatever to find out if it's appropriate. Because you might find out that no, they're going to be having surgery right now, or they're in for tests right now, and you won't be able to see them anyhow if you went. So make sure you call first. Secondly, visit before the surgery if you can. Okay, I always try to have a word of prayer with people before they go into surgery. It seems like it calms their fears a little bit, and assures them of God's presence and that. But visit before surgery if you can. Now, don't all crowd in there. Don't have a big crowd there. That's kind of embarrassing sometimes. But if you plan on going, if you can do it, visit before the surgery and have a word of prayer with them. Thirdly, I put down the word touch and use prudence. By that, sometimes just a hand on the hand or shoulder or whatever. But you got to be very careful. Some people are very cautious about touching, okay? And especially if they're diseased or something like that, don't touch them, okay? But sometimes that personal touch calms people's fears down a little bit, if they're going into surgery, or maybe they just need assurance that you're right by their side along with the Lord and that you care about them. Those things are very helpful to an individual, especially if they're recovering, that they sense that there's that human touch, that is so necessary. Number four is take along your sense of humor. Now, you got to be very careful about this. Now, I've got myself in fixes, as you can understand, with my sense of humor. But take along your sense of humor, kid around a little bit, I do this sometimes with children. If I go visit them, I'll buy one of those balloons that are helium filled, and they usually have like some kind of attacher or whatever, some kind of what do I want to say? I want to say like a clothespin or something like that on the end. And what I do is I tie it to the back of my belt, and it kind of follows me down the hallway. I come into the room, and the kids will see that balloon following me, and they'll kind of laugh at it, and I'll look this way and I can't see it, look that way, I can't see it, I can't figure out what they're laughing about, and that kind of gives them a little tickle, before things go on, and before you have your talk with them, So take along your sense of humor. Again, don't kid about the wrong things. Okay, if you're dealing with a person that has cancer, for example, don't tell cancer jokes. Okay, you understand that? Just make sure that you're very careful with your humor. But sometimes you make light of yourself, even and you just make this. You want to make the whole visit positive. You want to make the whole visit enjoyable for the individual. Number five, and again, these aren't in any particular order or logical order or whatever. They're just like a hodgepodge of things that I came up with. But number five, take your cues from the patient about how long you should stay. Now, there's certain cues. Now, you don't want to overstay. You'd rather people say, "I wish you would have stayed longer," than to say, "I wish you had gotten out of here faster." Okay, so you want to take your cue, but watch the patient and watch the patient's eyes. If they're like this, and they look aside, they don't want to look at you. That's a cue that maybe you're overstaying things. You better get out of there right away. But sometimes they're in pain, and they just don't feel like talking to anybody. Um, you know how it is. If you're in a great deal of distress, you really don't want to be talking about things with somebody else. You just want to be left alone, just rest. So take your cues from the patient about how long you should stay. Number six, visit quietly out of consideration for the patient's roommates, if any. Now, a lot of these rooms today are private rooms. Boy, it's a little far cry. I remember as a boy going into a ward where there had been at least a dozen beds there, and they put this this drape around you or whatever, to try to give you some kind of sense of privacy. But most rooms nowadays are private, and so you don't have to worry about this a great deal. But of course, you have to also be concerned about speaking too loud that would bother people in the other rooms as well. So be very careful about that. Visit quietly. Okay, number seven, let them know that you're comfortable talking to them about sensitive subjects, including death. Occasionally, you'll visit somebody that they know they're dying, and they just need to talk to somebody about it. You're going to come across a lot of uncomfortable scenarios. You're going to come across some different scenes that you might not be accustomed to or used to. Uh, be flexible and be compassionate. Let the people know, most importantly, that you care about them, that you care about their situation. And they might want to talk to you about death. Well, have some verses of scripture ready, that would talk about to be absent for the body, to be present with the Lord, and things like that. And give them that assurance, give them that hope. On occasion, I visited with people that were not saved. And that's a perfect opportunity to say, listen, you don't have to be afraid of death because the Lord Jesus Christ provided the way of eternal life and a home in heaven, and just go on from there. And talk to them about the Lord Jesus Christ, and you could probably even win them to Christ before they die. That'd be a wonderful thing. But understand that sometimes people want to talk, and you need to be prepared to show that love toward them and talk with them about it. Don't be frightened by those things either. Number eight, keep any information shared with you confidential unless given permission to share with other people. Sometimes people will say something that they'll talk about a relative or whatever like that. You just keep that between yourself and the patient, okay? But now there's one exception, and that's if the patient is contemplating harming himself or other people. In other words, if the patient maybe is so depressed and so discouraged about things that he's thinking about taking his own life, certainly you want to try to counsel him against that, but also you need to advise other people, advise the authorities, advise the nurses or doctors or whatever, so they can get him help right away. You want to be very careful. If he's talking about harming other people, if he says, listen, if I get my hands on that doctor that did this, you look at this stitch right here, and look what he did, you need to give warning about that as well. Those are the two exceptions. So number nine, avoid offering false hopes. Okay. Now I try to keep things upbeat and positive, and sometimes you're talking with a person that is terminal. You don't want to simply say, listen, buddy, I know God's going to pull you through this thing. You want to be very careful with stuff like that and giving false hopes. Now, you want to say something to the effect that we're going to trust God that He's going to do His will in your life, and certainly we want you to get better, But don't give him a false hope thinking that when you leave there that he's going to be better, So don't offer false hopes. Number 10, maintain comfortable eye contact. Now, by that I mean don't stare at the individual, you know, especially if they have scars around, or they're really sick or whatever. Maybe they have yellow eyes, jaundice in color. Don't look at them like this, That'll scare them half to death. And also, don't avoid looking at the patient. Like constantly looking away. Just don't want to look at the person, because then that gives them a bad sense of feeling as well. So you want to maintain a comfortable eye contact with them. Number 11, try to schedule your visits other than at mealtime. Um, and again, sometimes hospitals are kind of bad about when they prepare meals and deliver them to people. I've seen people that they'll start delivering lunchtime at 11 o'clock in the morning, as late as 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you got to be very careful. Just understand that when that lunch comes in, or when that meal comes in, it's coming in pretty warm. And if you're sitting there talking to the individual and they're waiting for you to leave before they start eating, by the time they eat, the food will be cold. And sometimes some people feel kind of self-conscious about eating in front of you. So if there's a meal there, just kind of excuse yourself. Say, listen, I just want to stop by, let you know we're praying for you and care about you, and leave it at that. Number 11, try to schedule your visits other than at meal. Oh, I just got through saying that. Number 12, excuse yourself when the doctor enters the room unless asked by the patient to stay. Sometimes the patient will ask you to stay because he doesn't understand everything the doctor says. Not that you necessarily will, but sometimes two sets of ears are better than one. If the doctor comes in, sometimes he wants to talk privately with the patient. And so just kindly excuse yourself. Say, I'll just step outside the door here until the doctor's done. Or if he's going to say, listen, I'm going to be in here for a while, just say, I'll come back some other time. But excuse yourself. Number 13, make pleasant conversation. Don't go in there talking about all the bad things that happened to you that day, or what happening in the world, whatever. They don't need more discouraging words. Just make the conversation as positive and as pleasant as possible. Number 14, remind your friend of other personal battles won. Maybe they say, oh, I don't know if I can lick this thing. Well, you can, if you remember, if you know him very well, you might be able to recall certain things that happened in his life that he thought was a crisis, and yet God pulled him through that crisis. And so if you remind him of those things, sometimes that gives him encouragement that, hey, listen, I did go through that, and God pulled me through it, and I can do it again by God's grace. So remind your friend of other personal battles won. And by personal battles, I'm not talking about your battles. I'm talking about the patient's battles. Number 15, get up-to-date information on the person's illness where possible. I think it's kind of good to know ahead of time, before you go in to visit, just exactly what the condition of the patient is. There's been a couple times in the past where I've gone into the situation and I thought the person was getting better. And I go in jovial and I said, man alive, this is really great. Praise God. The guy turns around and says, listen, the doctor told me I only have a couple days to live, Well, then you say, wow, I really stuck my foot in my mouth. So if you can, try to get up-to-date information. Sometimes you have to talk to the family member. Sometimes you talk to a nurse or whatever, but try to be up to date with the information. Okay, number 16, observe signs and notices on the patient's door. Sometimes with many patients, you'll see where you need to gown up or wear a mask, or make sure you wash your hands, or put that disinfectant on your hands. Make sure you observe those things and obey those things. So those aren't there just for door, some kind of door decoration or whatever, but they're there for a purpose. And so you want to observe signs and notices. Number 17, check with the nurse concerning mobility before you help the patient out of bed or take him for a walk. There's been a couple occasions where I've had patients, some guy said, listen, I really need to use the restroom. Can you help me up? And, I want to do right. I want to help him out, but you got to be very careful, that he's ambulatory, that he can move, and he can get out of bed. So make sure you check with the nurse. If he says, listen, I need to get up for a second, or I'd like to take a walk, make sure you talk to the nurse first and get permission. Number 18, be aware of the patient's diet before offering food or drink. Now, not all hospital food is good to eat. At least not palatable. Sometimes they leave out salt, things like that because of diet restrictions. And so they'll say, I don't like this food, Well, don't say, listen, I'll go down to McDonald's for you, or Burger King, and I'll bring up a big old Whopper for you, because that might be contrary to the diet that the doctor has prescribed for him. So be aware of the patient's diet before offering any food or drink to him. Number 19, talk about the outside world. And I don't mean the negative stuff, but sometimes people are in for the hospital for a couple days or whatever, maybe a week or whatever, and they kind of want to know what's going on. Maybe they might have a television that would help inform them of those things. but sometimes they don't look at the television, and maybe they just want to know what's going on around the church or whatever. So make sure you tell them some good stories, about what's going on, how the people miss them and everything, and that really encourages them, cheers them up. Number 20 is sit close. Now, I don't mean right on top of the individual. I mean, you wouldn't want somebody right here on you, but rather you want somebody that is not standing way back on the other side of the room or whatever, where they have to raise their voice so they can communicate with you, or maybe they can't even hear you. But sit comfortably close to the individual that they can talk to you in a normal tone of voice and you can hear them. Number 21, knock and receive permission before you enter a room, especially when the door is closed or a curtain is pulled. Now, that can be embarrassing. If you just barge in on somebody, they might be using the bathroom, you know what I mean? They might have the old porta potty right there, and you don't want to go and barge in on somebody like that. If you knock on the door and listen carefully, they'll tell you if it's okay to come in. Sometimes you can't hear. What I do is I'll crack the door and I'll say, hello, is any, this is Pastor Cruz or whatever, or just state your name. And then you'll be able to hear better if they're ready to receive you. And if you don't hear anything, maybe it's best to go down to the nurse's station and ask, I'd like to go by and see this person, and could you check and see if they're okay? And sometimes they're not even in the room. Sometimes they're going for tests or whatever. So, but make sure you knock and receive permission before you enter the room. And number 22, be cheerful. You don't want to go in there with a scowl on your face or angry. You don't want to be sad, or it just depresses them further or whatever. But be cheerful, Yes, they might be going through some very big hardship, but all they need is a friendly face right then, They need someone that shows love and concern for them. So make sure that you're cheerful around them. Number 23, when asked, be willing to assist the patient. For example, maybe they need an extra pillow behind their head, or maybe something is out of their reach on the table, whatever. And so it's good for you to go ahead and help them out with things like that. Now, again, we're not talking about getting them up out of bed, things like that, but simple things like that could be just a blessing to them. They really appreciate. Number 24, visit if you say you're going to. In other words, don't tell someone before their surgery, before they go into the hospital, say, okay, I'll be over there tomorrow, and not show up. They'll be looking for you. So make sure you fulfill your commitments. If you say you're going to be there, make sure you're there. Number 25, I have this. Play games if the patient desires for you to stay for a period of time. Sometimes they're lonely, they just need companionship, I guess. And if you can, sometimes you can stay there and just talk about things, or sometimes they just want to do something different, and you can play a game with them or whatever. I've done that in the past, sometimes you play a little silly game like Hangman or whatever. Sometimes you can get a board game for that matter and play. But that's only if the patient desires it. Most people in the hospital don't want to do that though, so be aware of that. Number 26, make the patient feel needed. Okay, make them feel needed. That let them know that people miss him and that you miss him. Don't simply say, "Well, I couldn't care less," Yeah, most people don't know that you're even here. They don't care. Don't say something stupid like that. Okay, make the patient feel needed. Number 27, avoid addressing the patient as honey, sweetie, or there's some other patronizing title, whatever. You want to be very careful about that. Don't be too familiar with people. Number 28, ask how you can help. Sometimes you don't know how to help, and so you just simply say, listen, is there some way I can help you? And sometimes they'll just say something simple like, listen, could you get me an extra blanket over here? I'm kind of chilly. And just little things like that. You can ask how to help and be a blessing to the individual. Number 29, position yourself so the patient is not looking right into a bright light. For example, I don't make it a practice to stand by the window, okay? That way the person is looking into the bright light coming in behind me, and that hurts their eyes. You got to be very careful. And also, if you're standing to the side of the bed where the patient has to turn their head real far like this, sometimes it's uncomfortable for them to do that. What I tend to do is stand out over by the foot there where they can see me, and even a little bit closer if I have to. But you got to be very careful even about that. I had a very embarrassing situation one time where a lady lifted the covers and there wasn't anything there. I mean, she didn't realize she was doing it. She was trying to get comfortable. But I'm down at the foot of the bed. I'm saying, whoa, So you have to be very careful about stuff like that. Okay. But position yourself so the patient is not, is comfortable looking at you. Okay. Number 30, depending on hospital rules and the endurance and permission of the patient, bring children to visit. Now, that's sometimes discouraged in hospitals, but occasionally just a young child, coming by, it cheers, especially older folks. They just love to see grandkids. They love to see children or whatever. And it just something about that perks them up. There's some hospitals that will use pets, like a dog that will come by and just that little sight of a dog and pet the dog or whatever will help cheer the patient up, and they say that when a person is has cheer in their life or whatever joy, it helps them to heal faster. It really does. So sometimes bringing a child to visit is encouraging to the patient. Number 31. By the way, talk about kids. You want to be careful about that too. Sometimes kids don't like to see someone with tubes up their nose and maybe bandages all over their head, and that you want to be very careful about that as well. These are just common sense things, aren't they? Okay, number 31. Number 31. Avoid probing or rapid fire questions for a number of reasons. Number one, most people that are in the hospital don't appreciate you probing every little question about their surgery or what they're going through or whatever. But if you do rapid fire questions, they think that they're on trial or something like that, that you're trying to work for the police or whatever, So avoid those things. Avoid probing. Now, you certainly want to say, listen, how are you feeling today? Stuff, something light like that, but don't go into every little detail. Sometimes they don't want to talk about stuff like that. Number 32, think of your visit as a social visit, not something that you're obligated to do. In other words, don't come into the room saying, well, Pastor told me to come over here and see you, so here I am, Don't do that. Again, it kind of goes back to what we talked about, making the patient feel needed. Think of it as a social visit. That you want to come by there, try to be a blessing individual, and encourage them. Number 33, be sensitive about how you expose your own anxieties. Now, you're going to see some things. You're going to see tubes and all sorts of crazy machines or whatever. Don't go in and say, oh, this is terrible. Oh, I didn't believe it was this bad. Don't do that, okay? Be sensitive about your own anxieties. You have to learn self-control, okay? And learn to control your emotions. Learn to control what you're feeling on the inside. You're going to see all sorts of crazy things in the hospital. You're going to hear all sorts of crazy things. Even from the patient, you'll hear some crazy things. Don't be taken aback by those things, okay? Learn to go with the flow and just be even-tempered and mild-mannered about the whole thing. But be sensitive about how you expose your own anxieties. Maybe on the inside. I know that for the longest time, just the smell of hospitals would get to me, But I had to hide that. In trying to be a blessing. In other words, you don't focus on yourself. You focus on the other individual. Okay, number 34, keep continual contact during long hospital stays. If they're in there for a few weeks or a month or whatever, don't just pay one visit and let it go, Again, use your judgment about this, but let them know continually how much you care about them and how you can, and ask how you can be a blessing to them. Number 35, if they so desire, read to them. Sometimes they want you to read a passage of scripture. Sometimes they have a book by the side, and maybe their eyes are bothering them, but they'd like to hear maybe the next chapter of a book or whatever. Go ahead and read. If that's what they want, go ahead and do it. Number 36, allow the patient to cry, and that includes men. As you know, I have no problem doing that. But some people are self-conscious about that, and as soon as the patient starts crying, they want to leave the room or whatever. But allow them to cry. Allow them to show upset, being upset or showing fears or whatever. Allow them to show those emotions. And then number 37, affirm their loss, whatever it may be. Now, by that, I don't mean, yeah, you lost your leg, you didn't need it anyway. You don't want to say something stupid, okay? But simply say, something, I'm really sorry that you lost your leg. I'm really sorry that you're going through this, In other words, you're affirming, you're agreeing with them that it is a loss, okay? And that there'll be a change in the lifestyle as such. And so you want to try to encourage the patient. Number 38, offer to check on the patient's family or house and even errands they might need to have done. Now, a lot of times people have kinfolk, that could do those things for them. But if they don't, sometimes they would appreciate if you just stop by and make sure their house isn't burned down, or maybe there's pets they need to have taken care of. In other words, try to be a help as best as you can without infringing upon their privacy in that. Number 39, be willing to sit down and spend some quality time with them. As I mentioned before, you might be called upon to read to them and maybe just sit down and talk to them, play a game or whatever. Be willing to sit down and spend some quality time. Now, sometimes you can't do it. Sometimes you have a schedule as well, and you can only maybe have 10 minutes to pop by for a visit or whatever. That's acceptable. That's okay. But be sensitive about that. And if they want you to stay, let them stay. But be sensitive about that. That sometimes you think that they want you to stay and they really don't. They're just being polite. Okay? So be careful about that. Okay, then number 40, focus on the conversation on the patient and not on your problems. Don't go in there, for example, say a guy has just come out of surgery, go in there and say, oh man, I got this problem going on at work, and the boss is giving me all sorts of grief. Don't talk about your problems. You're there to focus on him and his problems, okay, and what he's going through. Number 41, if you are a family member, ask the nurses questions if you don't understand something. Granted, a lot of doctors speak goes over our heads. And certainly when you're a patient and you have the stress of maybe going through a surgery or maybe a surgery is approaching, you don't quite understand everything, sometimes you need family members to explain those things to you. Well, if you're a family member and you have a loved one that's in the hospital and they're ready for surgery and the doctor comes in, stay there and listen and ask questions. Even ask the doctor, ask the nurses questions to clarify things. And the better you have an understanding of it, the better you can explain it to your friend that's in the hospital. Number 42, take a little surprise gift. I mentioned earlier about the balloons I would give to kids, that with the helium-filled balloons, they like those things. Sometimes you can bring a plant or even a card or something, and just that little bit of extra, it brightens their day. So take a little surprise gift once in a while. Number 43, offer to make phone calls, write notes, mail letters. Again, these are like errands that they want you to do. Maybe they said, listen, I got a brother back in Tennessee that doesn't know my condition. Could you call him and let him know what's going on? And so offer to make those calls. Number 44, end the visit well with prayer. That's really important, okay? Especially if you're dealing with a Christian here. I do it even with unsaved people, is end it with prayer. Let them, call upon the Lord and ask the Lord to take care of them, watch over them, if there's a surgery, to guide the doctor's hands, as they perform the surgery, and whatever. But make sure that you end the visit well, positively, and with prayer. And then number 45 is depend on the Lord to direct your visit. Again, we can use common sense all we want to talk about, but sometimes we just have to depend upon God's wisdom in what to say and how to act. Now, the next part of this, the next page talks about how not to make a hospital call. Let's go through these briefly. In 2 Kings chapter 20 and verse 1, we read this. In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death, and the prophet Isaiah the son of Amoz came to him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. Now, I wouldn't want Isaiah to make that kind of call on me, okay? You probably wouldn't appreciate that either. You can imagine somebody coming into your room, as a patient, saying, listen, buddy, you're going to die, okay? Set your house in order. That's not going to do it for you, So how not to make a hospital call? Let's remember the following things not to do when making a hospital call. Number 1, don't visit the patient if you're sick yourself, okay? If you're coughing around them or whatever, that's not a good thing, okay? You can give them your germs. One of the worst places to pick up diseases and germs is in a hospital. You have nurses going from one patient to the next, and sometimes they're not careful about washing their hands or whatever, change their gowns or whatever. And so you got to be very careful about that. But don't you be the cause of the new disease coming in that person's life, or the new sickness. So don't visit the patient if you're sick yourself. Number 2, don't let technology become a barrier to your visit. In other words, like I said before, you're going to see monitors and tubes and wires and all sorts of gadgets and things like that. Occasionally you might visit somebody that's on a ventilator and they can't really respond to you, as far as talking with you. And you see that pump going back and forth and you hear the breath. And sometimes that can be kind of a scary experience. Excuse me, I made myself cough. But understand that don't let those things stop you from making the visit. You might think that the person maybe has his eyes closed and can't hear you, but sometimes they have their eyes closed and they can hear you, and they will appreciate the fact. I've had people tell me after you get home from the hospital. I remember you visiting me, and I think last year I visited somebody in the hospital, and they said they really. I thought they were sound asleep too. I just prayed for them, quietly, and they said, something. I saw that you were there, and I thank you so much for coming by. That just stuff like that just really encourages the patient. But don't let technology itself become a barrier to your visit. Number three, don't whisper when talking to the medical staff or family as if you don't want the patient to hear. You know, what do you think, doctor? Is he going to live? You don't want to do stuff like that because they'll hear you, and then that gives them anxiety about the whole thing. Number four, don't sit on the patient's bed or on the empty bed next to the patient. Okay. Um, Number one, you don't want to sit on the patient's bed. You might stir something. You might cause them to jerk or whatever. You don't want to do that. And then also, if there's an empty bed next to them, don't sit on that bed. I mean, that bed is made and ready for the next patient. So don't sit on that bed either. Number five is pretty obvious. Don't break hospital rules. Okay. If they say that visitation ends at 9 o'clock in the evening, don't stay till 10. Okay. Make sure that you don't break hospital rules. Number six, don't flatter the patient. If he's sick, and he's there in bed, and he's got the bedpan next to him and everything. He's got the little tray they use whenever they vomit just next to him like this, Don't come in there and say, boy, you look great today. They know you're lying, okay? So don't flatter the patient. Number seven, don't take their negativism personally, okay? They might be just in a foul mood or whatever, and they might snap at you about something. Don't take it personally. Understand that people are under distress, under duress, and so just let it go. Let it be like water off a duck's back. Number eight, don't eat in the patient's room. Now, if you're joining them in a meal, that's one thing. I mean, sometimes they won't mind you bringing up something from the cafeteria, and sometimes the nurses say you go ahead and you can even bring up something for the patient. You can eat together. That's fine, okay? But don't come up there, with a Whopper in your hand, and say, hey, man, I'm so sorry you're on this low-salt diet. You can't have this, You don't want to do that, okay? That makes them feel even worse. Okay, number nine, don't tell your troubles to the patient, okay? He's got his own troubles to worry about. So don't worry him with your troubles, okay? Don't go to him for counseling during that time, okay? Number 10, don't show shock at odors and tubes and needles. I'll tell you what, sometimes you're going to come into a room, it's going to stink. It's going to stink. And, they can't help it, One thing I'll tell you, and this will be a little bit later on about visiting, when to visit people, but sometimes people get gas, and they can't help it. You got to be aware of that and not be offended by those things. Don't be offended by the tubes, the needles. You'll see all sorts of IV needles, things like that. Don't show shock at those things. Be expecting those things. Number 11, don't watch television unless it's what the patient wants you to do with him. Okay. In other words, when you're visiting someone and maybe there's a ball game on the television, don't look at the ball game, and just forget about the patient. You don't want to do that. Okay. Now, if the patient is watching the ball game, he wants you to join and watch him, maybe talk about the game. That's fine. Okay. But don't watch television unless the patient wants you to do it with him. Number 12. Don't get involved in family disputes, okay? Don't get involved with family disputes. Sometimes you'll have a person say, well, my uncle hasn't visited me or my husband hasn't visited me or whatever, Don't get in the middle of that, okay? Just remain really neutral and say, well, we'll be praying about that thing. Change the subject, okay? Don't get involved with family disputes. Number 13, don't look at your watch, okay? Don't, people go like this, and they say, you're feeling better. Oh, yeah, okay, all right. Because then they get the feeling that they're not necessary in your life. They're not needful in your life, and you don't care about them. Okay. No, don't look at your watch. Number 14, don't negate their feelings. I said before, they're going to show fear. They're going to show anxiety at times. It may be anger or sorrow or whatever. Don't negate their feelings. Accept them. Understand them. Okay, and allow them to express those feelings. Number 15, don't make promises you cannot keep or offers you cannot fulfill. Okay, don't promise them something. I promise I'll go by the house and check on it, or I promise I'll do this errand for you and not do it, okay? If you don't think you can do it, then don't promise to begin with, okay? It's best just to not say anything. Number 16, don't tell horror stories or compare illnesses. For example, I remember this one guy, when I had my appendix taken out as a boy, this one man came in to visit me, and he ripped up his shirt, he showed me his scar, That didn't do a whole lot for me. So don't compare your illnesses. Don't compare. Don't compare notes on what you went through or whatever. Don't tell those horror stories. That I had a friend that went through the same thing you're going through, and bless his heart, he's not with us anymore. That's terrible. You don't want to tell a person that. Number 17, don't correct their answers or finish their stories. Um, Sometimes medication will cause them to forget things. Sometimes medication will cause them to hallucinate. Many of you remember Clark Cox, and Clark and I had a good relationship. And one time I went to visit him shortly after one of the surgeries that he had, and the medication caused him to hallucinate, and he could see scorpions up on the wall, and nobody would believe him. And so finally, I came in the room. He says, "Brother Dave, you'll tell me the truth. I know you'll tell me the truth. Are there scorpions up there on the wall?" I said, "Well, where, Clark?" And I would put my hand up there. Show me where one is. Right there. Okay, now I'll put my hand on it. Now see, Clark, there's no scorpion there. And it caused him to calm down. He realized then that he was having hallucinations and that. But don't correct their stories. Don't finish their stories or whatever. Maybe they're telling you a story and they just get tongue tied or whatever. Allow them to talk. Just be patient with them. Okay. Number 18. Don't finish their sentences for them. This is along the same line, but especially if they're a stroke victim, sometimes it's harder for them to spit the words out, and you want to be patient with them. Don't be impatient. Allow them to tell the story or allow them to express themselves. Number 19, don't assume anything. Don't assume anything. Um, Let them tell you the full story, or make sure you get the facts afterwards or whatever. But don't assume everything. Sometimes you might assume that they're going to get out of the hospital tomorrow, and they might even assume that themselves, but then they might have a setback. So you want to be very careful about assuming things. Number 20, don't be judgmental. Again, if they're really negative and maybe they're critiquing the doctor and everything, don't be judgmental. Don't say, "Listen, you don't know what you're talking about." I've had sometimes patients, because they're on medicine, they say, "Well, even though I asked Christ to save me, I believe I'm going to hell." You want to assure them they're not. But don't debate that with them. Just simply say, "Listen, we'll talk about it later when you're feeling better." So don't be judgmental. Be careful about that. Number 21, don't criticize the doctor or the prescribed treatment. You want to encourage them, give them confidence that the doctor is doing the best he can. Now, after all, understand that doctors practice medicine, okay? And by the very word practice means they haven't perfected it. And doctors can make mistakes. But don't criticize the doctor. Don't simply say, "Well, you got a rotten doctor here. This is a lousy hospital, and oh, you having this treatment? I've seen that treatment go bad so many times." Don't say things like that, okay? That discourages the patient and won't help their healing. You let them deal with their doctor themselves. Number 22, don't awaken the patient unless the nurse gives you permission, but rather leave a note that you stopped by. One of the worst places to get any rest is a hospital. And if you've ever been in one, you know what I'm talking about, that there's so much action going on, and throughout the night, excuse me, sometimes nurses will come by and probe on you or give you a shot or check your temperature or whatever. It's hard to get some rest. And so when you go in there and they're sleeping, it's probably because they haven't slept all night, So be careful about that. Don't wake them up unless the nurse gives you permission. But what you can do is just jot a little note down. Sometimes I take a gospel tract and simply write down there, "This is Brother Dave. I stopped by to see you. We'll be praying for you," and leave it there by his bedside. And then number 23, don't visit a patient the day after a major surgery. Now, I said earlier about patients sometimes after surgery having gas. Usually the day after is when they have the buildup of gas or whatever, and they feel discomfort, and they sometimes are very embarrassed about it, So don't visit a patient the day after surgery. I like to at least have 2 days, after surgery, before I start visiting them again. Number 24, don't try to cheer up the patient when he really wants to talk about his all. I'm sorry, let me read it again. Don't try to cheer up the patient when he really wants to talk about how afraid he is. Okay? Again, this allowing the patient to express their feelings. and sometimes they just want to cry. And you could try to encourage your hearts or whatever, but say don't be put on a happy show, whatever, and tell jokes, during that time. That's misplaced humor. The Bible even talks about that. Uh, but number 25, don't use the word we to talk about the patient. How are we doing today? Don't do that, okay? How are you doing, okay? And then number 26, don't forget about the patient after he returns home from the hospital. A follow-up visit, is important. Just give them a phone call even. Say, listen, I'm glad you're home from the hospital and hope things are going well, and offer any help, if they still need some. And let them know that you'll be praying for them as well. Well, this is kind of a lengthy lesson, but understand that we need a practical lesson like this, because all of us are going to make hospital calls if we haven't already done so. And sometimes just some common sense material like this will help us. I trust this is a blessing to you, and hopefully we'll see you in church very soon. We're looking forward to that day. God bless you.